Colleen, I see sun behind you in that window. What's the
Yeah,
weather like there?
it's pretty nice out. It was a little windy yesterday.
Us too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Remind me of what state you're in again, Rebecca.
I'm in Kansas, so I'm like right in the center of the world, but it's often called a flyover state. 'Cause everybody just flies over it. So yeah, but it's beautiful here too.
All right. Well, it looks like we are going to have additional people sign on. We had a full house who had signed up, so we're excited um, for those who could be here with us today. And Rebecca, if I could have you just hit the slide. So my name is Colleen Igo. I'm with the York County Systems of Care. I was part of a group of some amazing organizations who actually put this week-long series together. So I want to acknowledge and thank all the committee members who made this possible. We're excited because Rebecca actually is our keynote speaker, and she is kicking off the week of activities for Youth Homelessness Awareness Week. So we're excited to have you, Rebecca. I actually had an opportunity to meet Rebecca through Zoom several months ago. And in hearing her presentation, I was just so moved by her story and her knowledge that we wanted to bring her here to York County through the System of Care grant. So I'm glad that we were able to bring you here, and I'm excited to hear your story. We do want to make this as interactive as possible. With the webinar, we have some limitations as far as direct contact, so what we're going to be doing is doing everything through the chat. So if you have comments or Rebecca's asking for feedback, please feel free to use the chat. I have a helper, Dawn Squire from Contact 211, who's also going to be on to help monitor that. I also want to add our website. We have an event website that's going to be added to the chat. So I encourage you to take advantage of that and looking at what is scheduled for the rest of the week, as well as what resources are available as it pertains to homelessness and resources. So with that, I would like to welcome Rebecca Lewis Pankratz, who's with ESDAC. And she's going to be talking about the healing poverty through the science of resilience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rebecca.
Hey, thanks. Man, I got a couple little butterflies in my stomach as soon as you said hand it over to me. So here we go. Good morning. I am just really honored that I get to kind of kick off this conversation for all of you. Through stories, I'm going to kind of lay out trauma-informed science, how it relates to poverty. And the long and the short of it is that we heal a brain thing with a love thing. We have this compelling science that is propelling us forward. And there's a lot of things that we've been trying to figure out for a very long time about people and what they need to capture the lives that they're supposed to have. And so I have got to be a part of work that really demonstrates that for the last several years. So how did I get here? If you're on Twitter, you can find me here. Sometimes people like to tweet during presentations. And so that is my Twitter handle. So I'm going to take you way back. That baby there in the middle, that's my mom. She was a daddy's girl. Her dad was a high-ranking military official. He had been stationed overseas for the birth of all 4 of her siblings, but he was home for her birth, so she was a daddy's girl. They lived in Riverside, California. It was the late 50s. They had a custom-built home, first family on the block to get a color television. Like, it was really that life, right? Right around 5 years old, my grandma packed up all 5 kids, put them in the station wagon, looked at her husband and said, "We don't want anything from you." And there was good reason for that. But at 5 years old, my mom's whole world shattered. My grandma moved her kids into a one-bedroom apartment in the inner city in California, and my grandma started working multiple jobs to keep food on the table. So my mom was left to be cared for by her two older brothers. And you guys can probably connect dots as to what happens to broken, unattended children in the city in California at the onset of the 60s. My mom doesn't remember any safe, supportive people in her life through school or through neighborhood. It was just her and her two older brothers. So trouble started to follow that story. And my mom dropped out of high school, got pregnant with me young. Her two older sisters, they told her, they said, look, if you're going to have this baby out of wedlock, we're not going to help you. And so my mom was like, and she turned towards the social service system and welfare. And my mom co-parented me the first several years of my life. The places that we lived in California were like pretty dangerous neighborhoods. And, my mom had all this brokenness and no community to help her find her way. So from 0 to 5 for me, I saw more stuff in that time period in my life than I've seen the entire rest of my life. Lots of drugs, lots of violence. My mom got addicted to heroin when I was 3. And so, for the next couple years, I just kind of watched my mom slide down a wall on a regular basis. But my grandma she retired from a career that she had gotten later in life when I was 5. And she saw what was happening. And she told my mom, she said, look, I'm going to take Becky. We're going to move to Kansas. You can either go or you can stay. And so my mom did some serious soul searching. And in 1979, we all loaded up the U-Haul and moved to a tiny Midwest town in central Kansas. Automatically, things got much more gentle for me as a kiddo in that small Midwest community. But I always kind of like to stop here and kind of point out that this community was predominantly middle class, right? Central America, coming from the West Coast. So me and my hippie single mom, we did not stand out at all. Even though things got much more gentle for me in this small Midwest community, right? Sometimes people get clean, but they don't always know how to get better. So there was this stress in my home. And as a little kid, I always knew the name of the landlord, when the light bill was due, the mean lady's name at the power company that kept shutting us off, right? Always conversations in my home around, gas for a car, if there was a car, laundry, food. It was just that experience. Right around 2nd grade, my mom met a local boy and I got a dad, which to this day was one of the best things that ever happened to me. My dad stepped in and started to buffer a lot of that toxic stress that I was experiencing with my mom. But my new dad was the lead singer in a rock band. So when he entered our lives, that meant band practice started at my house every night. So in 2nd grade, I got an alarm clock for my birthday. And I'd get myself up for school in the morning, and there'd be a cup of milk and a bowl of dry cereal in the fridge, and I'd get ready for school, right? And my mom was a hippie, remember? And so she didn't care what I wore to school. And Pippi Longstocking was my hero at the time. So you guys can imagine how I showed up at the building every day. But I loved school. I would get there super early before anybody else would get there. And I would sit outside and I would wait for those lights to come on and for somebody to open the doors and start the day. I had these amazing teachers. These teachers made me really believe that I was smart, I was important, I was wanted. So I couldn't wait to get to the building every day. So between these teachers and my grandma, this is where some of the best memories of my childhood were built. Here comes sixth grade, right? Middle school. And I couldn't wait to go to middle school. I was so excited. The first day of middle school, my dad takes me to school and drops me off out front. And there's a bunch of kids standing out front, right? And I remember I got out of that car and I don't know what happened, but all in one moment, it just kind of washed over me. Oh, I'm poor. I'm not just like poor, I'm like really flipping poor. And I knew in that moment that I didn't want kids to know. I didn't want teachers to know. The second day of sixth grade, my dad was driving me to school, and a couple of blocks away from the building, I said, "Hey, Dad, do you think you can stop and let me out here and I'll walk the rest of the way?" You see, my parents had this car that I still don't know who does this, but every single piece of metal on that car was a different color, and it smoked and it made loud noises. It looked like a Blues Brothers car, right? And when I said that, I watched my dad's face just fall. And I knew that I hurt him, but I didn't care. I didn't want anybody to see me get out of that car again. So I lost the warm, connected feeling of grade school teachers. Looking back, I don't remember one teacher who cared if I showed up to that building or not. And then there was these girls from across town, right? Like the right side of town. And I desperately wanted to be friends with them. And that went horribly wrong. So it didn't take very long before I decided my number one job as a student was to keep teachers from teaching. So I would get to class and I'd watch the clock and covertly see how long I could keep a teacher from starting his or her lesson plan. Those girls from across town that I tried to be friends with, I figured out that if I started physically fighting, that I could buy space. So it didn't take very long before I became that kid in the building, right? Met the vice principal, got a pretty permanent seat in his office. And the work that I do now, I've reflected a lot on that time period in my life. And, you know, what I couldn't say, but what I was screaming was, I'm ashamed, I'm afraid, I'm lonely, and I need you. That is definitely not what you would have taken away from what was happening, the way I was presenting. Right around 13, uh, my grandma came to me and was like, hey, she was working part-time as a hostess in a restaurant. And she's like, hey, I talked to my boss, we're super shorthanded. And he said that even though you're so young, you can come in and work a couple hours a week waiting tables. So that was amazing, right? And pretty quickly, I figured out that if I picked up shifts for other girls and came to work and didn't clock in, the manager wouldn't say anything. So I started working a bunch of hours under the table. Things were getting more and more difficult at home. And I was fighting with my mom on a regular basis. And so I started scouring the newspapers and making a budget. And I saved up my money and I moved out when I was 15 years old and rented my first trailer house in a small hidden ghetto on the west end of our community. Walked in the power company, like they didn't ask a lot of questions back then because I just walked in there. I was tall, I had a deep voice, got my lights turned on. I was big stuff. Here comes high school, right? I'm just getting better at being that kid. Met the new vice principal, got a new chair in a new office, because it wasn't how long could I keep a teacher from starting his or her lesson plan. It was how fast can I get kicked out of your room today? Except for these two teachers. First hour, I had Mr. Hudson. Mr. Hudson was the head of the English department, and he was a coach, and he was this warm, fuzzy guy. And he always had a toupee that was flopped over on the wrong side, right? I had Hudson first hour, and I'd already made up my mind. I wasn't turning in any work for anybody. They could make me go, but they couldn't make me work, right? And Mr. Hudson just stayed after me. And I don't know, probably late September, I started showing up and there'd be a cup of coffee on my desk first hour in Mr. Hudson's class. Nobody else's desk, just mine. And I didn't drink coffee, right? I was a kid, but I'd come in and I'd put my hands around that cup of coffee because I was cold, and I'd put my head down and go to sleep. And I think Mr. Hudson knew that I walked from all the way across town, but he just stayed after me. And I don't remember how he did it, but he got me to write something and I turned it in. And I remember him finding me in that big high school, and he had my paper in his hand and he's like, "Tell me what you mean by this. Do you realize how deep this is? You have such a gift for writing." So I started to turn in more work for Mr. Hudson. And he'd send my papers back with these long diatribes on the side of my page about how smart I was. Tell me more about this. Then there was Mrs. Liljegren, my art teacher. Now, Mrs. Liljegren was not a warm and fuzzy woman. She was very stoic, but I don't know, partway into my freshman year, I ticked some senior girls off at lunch, and like 3 of them were chasing me through the hall, and we all had art together right after lunch. So I ran into the art room, slid into my seat, and Miss Liljegren saw those 3 girls, and she stopped them in their tracks and she reprimanded them. And she said, "You know what? You guys want to pick on a freshman? You can spend the rest of the semester in the clay room." So she stood up for me. So I thought, I better start doing some work, right? So I started working on some art thing, and Miss Liljegren comes over and she's like, "You're actually pretty good." She said, "I'm going to expect great things out of you this semester." She said, "Oh, by the way, can you come after school and help me hang some stuff up?" So freshman year, part of my sophomore year, there were many days where I would go to school and go to first hour to Mr. Hudson's classes, go to art to Miss Liljegren's classes, and ditch all the rest. I was definitely outrunning the truancy officer at this point. Um, and there were 2 narratives being told about me in that building. And I promise you, they looked incredibly different. And so, I just want you to stop and think for a minute. What was it about those 2 teachers that they got me to succeed with them? I had zeros in every class for incompletes except for English, creative writing, and art. I had A's. My 16th birthday is fast approaching, right? And I have a dream. I have a dream. I'm going to get out. I'm going to get out of this town. I'm going to go out into the world, and I'm going to find a house like girls have on the other side of town. So on the morning of my 16th birthday, I called the secretary at the high school, and I'm like, "Guess what? I'm quitting." And she said, "Good." Right. My aunt calls the school and she's like, "She's dropping out. What are you guys going to do?" And the principal said, "She is light years ahead of the other children. She does nothing but cause problems here, and we don't know how to help her." 3 months before I turned 16 years old, I fell madly in love with someone that was 3 years older than me and fresh out of the penitentiary that was 30 miles down the road. So on my 16th birthday, we left state, and I was going to go and find my dream. So I didn't call or come home for 3.5 years. And you guys know what I found, right? I did not find a house like girls had on the other side of town. Very quickly, I realized I had just found more survival. Pretty quickly, I figured out, oh, this is always about the lights and the rent, gas for a car, if there is a car, working crazy hours at low wage jobs. Food's always last on the list, right? And my soon to be husband and I, we started partying, and pretty soon partying turned into addictions, and addictions turned into a 13-year long marriage of profound and incredible abuse. And what is so fascinating about my story is that from the time I was really tiny, my grandma put this deep faith concept in me. So while all of this is happening, I'm reading my Bible and I'm praying every day, "God, make him different. God, just change him." And because of that faith concept, I had a really hard time wrapping my head around divorce. I just didn't feel like I had permission to do that. But as the years ticked on and things got scarier and scarier, and I will tell you that I left that relationship and went into hiding more than 50 times in that 13 years. And he would terrorize people and I would come back. And so I was definitely caught up in a very vicious domestic violence cycle. My husband was the drug dealer. And so the drug dealer holds a lot of power in a community, and a lot of influence. And so in my community, but at 29 years old, there was a day where something happened and I finally felt like I had permission from God to leave. And that also was coupled with the courage to leave and stay gone. So I went to a judge and got a PFA, a protection from abuse order. And the judge gave me our truck, my dog that I'd had for 10 years, which was my only friend, and let me get a few possessions out of the house. So my soon to be ex-husband stopped me at my job. So I had to quit. He took the truck and took it out in the country and blew the motor. He stole my dog and put her in the country in a kennel with some rusty water, and she died. And he found my storage shed that I have my possessions in and broke into it and pulled them all out and lit them on fire in the parking lot. So here I am, 29 years old, high school dropout, no car, no job, no money, all this brokenness, and pregnant with my first baby, right? Here comes this perfect little person. And I just remember thinking, I swore I would never be a single mom. I swore I would never raise kids in poverty. I got to do something different than what my mom was able to do for me. So I enrolled in college full time and went back to work full time. And my new baby cried full time. And to kind of drive this home a little bit more, like I was terrified of infants my whole life. I had never actually physically had my hands on an infant until they laid my own on my chest. And I was out in the middle of nowhere in a crappy trailer house in a community of 400 people. So really the middle of nowhere, no cell phone. And all he would do is cry, right? So every single day I'd just be like, I'd watch the clock and I'd be like, is it time to go to work? Is it time to go to school? Because I didn't know what to do. Fast forward, 2 more failed relationships and 2 little boys later, I was back in McPherson County, the same community that I started out in, in the same hidden ghetto that I started out in when I was 15. Bought a trailer house that should have been condemned for $1,000. Holes in the floor, windows broke out, front door didn't close right, water heater didn't work. I had a car that was faithful to nothing but breakdowns. I was 7 months clean and sober, working nights as a bartender at the bowling alley, still in college trying to get a 4-year degree. Oh, my desktop is showing. Hey, Colleen, that's good. Let me go back here. Still in college trying to get a 4-year degree. Okay, Colleen, give me a thumbs up. There. Colleen, am I good? I'm watching chat. Yeah, Dawn, thanks. Okay, good deal. Still in college trying to get a 4-year degree to be a high school art teacher. And my oldest son and my youngest son were just like climb the walls wild. And I knew it was because I was a really bad mom, right? Every single day I'd get up and I'd run as fast as I knew how to run, and I'd pray as fast as I knew how to pray. But this bone crushing weight of poverty just kept spinning me back, right? Like I'd get a step forward and I'd get knocked back 8. I was exhausted. I was ashamed and I was angry. There was a chick in the trailer park that she was like, hey, you got a little one. There's a big church here in town that if you just walk in there, they'll give you diapers, no questions asked. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, just go in there and tell them you need some diapers. And I didn't want to do that, but diapers are like super expensive, right? So I started frequenting this church. And And there was a lady that ran that outreach, and she just kind of took a shine to me. Every time I'd walk in the building, Lynette would stop whatever she was doing and she'd light up. She learned my name. She learned my kids' names. And one day I was in there telling her, I was like, Lynette, I promise when I get through college and I become a teacher, I'm going to come here and I'm going to give back so that other moms can have this. And Lynette just kind of lovingly shook her head and pointed to a flyer that said something about a class to get out of poverty. And my first thought was, what are these people going to teach me about getting out of poverty that I'm not already doing? And then my next thought was, man, I've got so many diapers from Lynette. I better sign up. She's like, oh yeah, it'll be great. She said, you come one night a week. There's a family style meal. The kids go to childcare. The parents go to a class, and there's all these middle class people there for support. All of that sounded absolutely horrifying to me. But out of this debt that I felt like I owed Lynette, I signed up. And you guys have to kind of understand, the meltdowns with my oldest and my youngest were like so extreme. I didn't take them to Walmart. I didn't take them to McDonald's. We were really, really isolated. I showed up that first night and the whole parking lot is full, right? And I get to the gymnasium door where the entrance is. I got my three little boys with me. My heart is pounding. And I'm thinking, I'm going to walk in here and there's going to be these middle class people and they're going to be like, look at your kids, look at your life. Here's where you're messed up. Try and fix me. And truth be told, I knew my kids lived in a place that children should not be living in. I had addictions not very far off of my background. But I said a prayer and I pushed that door open, and there were probably 60 people in this gymnasium, right? And these, what I considered powerful looking middle-class women, came over and just scooped up my little boys and acted like they weren't running amok. And then after a little while, they told me and about 8 other parents, they said, come on, come this way. And they took us in a room and they sat us down and they said, look, here's the deal. We see families struggling in McPherson County, and we think the root cause of that struggle is poverty, and we want to solve it. And we need people like you who are living it to tell us what to do. So instantly they disarmed me and they empowered me. And what they didn't say, but what I heard for the first time in my entire life in this Midwest community was, hey, Rebecca, we see you guys now, and we want to know how to really help. So I left that first night just kind of blown away, right? Like, I'd never heard middle-class people talk about poverty like that before, kind of like they knew my story. So I get my kids and we get in our broken down car out in the church parking lot. And I had so much hope that I just remember I felt like I was floating in the front seat of that car. And I just start talking out loud to God. And I'm like, God, I think you finally brought us somewhere that we're going to get out of poverty. And what is so fascinating about that night when I look back on that, is that from the time I was 13 and I clocked in at that first job up until that night at age 37, I swear to you, in my mind, I was getting out of poverty the whole entire time. That's not what you'd have thought if you looked at my life, but that's what I thought I was doing. So I started going to these classes and listening to these people. And one of the first things I begin to recognize is that, generationally middle class people and generationally poor people, we don't even speak the same language. And it's no wonder we're bumping up against each other, coming away frustrated and hurt. And then they started to talk about future. And they said, Rebecca, middle class people can typically see 2 to 5 to 10 years out. And I sat there that night and I looked and I couldn't see past 2 weeks. It was like it was all cobwebby. And then they started to talk about sustainability and sustainable lifestyles. And I was like, I know what that word means in the dictionary. But I kind of only thought farmers used it. I didn't really realize that people actually used it to design their life. And that's when I kind of had this realization that, I'm an expert at putting out fires in my life, but I don't know anything about fire prevention. And then they started to talk about a concept called social capital. And they said, yeah, Rebecca, if you want to get in the next boat, what relationships do you have with people in that boat? So I thought about it, and truth be told, the only relationships I had with middle-class people in that time in my life were people who were paid to be in my life. So I had all these paradigms shifting, right? And you graduate this 20-week class, and then there's an invitation to stay on for 2 to 5 more years to get yourself out of poverty permanently. You get matched with a middle-class friend to just kind of cheer you on with the goals that you set, right? So I accepted that invitation. But right about that same time, all 3 of my kids were in the same elementary building at the same time. And my oldest and my youngest were the kids that were taking over the building, flipping desks, running out of classrooms, hitting other kids, crawling under stuff. You couldn't get them out. And I had these amazing teachers that were like, we don't know what this is, but we're going to figure this out with you. But what that meant was that I was at the school every month for another meeting, trying to figure out the next intervention. So one day I was at the school, left the school late afternoon from yet another meeting. And I get out in my car in the parking lot, and I call the Poverty Project coach, and I'm like, look, here's the deal. My kids are going through all of these testing for autism at a university. We've got caseworkers in our life. We've got mental health appointments twice a week. There's a medication roller coaster. We're shorthanded at the bar. I'm not going to enough meetings. I'm worried about my recovery. All this stuff's happening at the school. And I've got 17 incompletes at college. I can't take this. I'm melting down. And the Poverty Project, I said, I got to take a step back from college. And the Poverty Project coach, she's like, absolutely, you're not going to take a step back from college, Rebecca. She said, you're going to go in there and you're going to talk to your professors. You're going to work something out, because if you do take a step back from college, this is never going to stop happening to you. And I remember I hung up the phone, and out loud, I was like, you bitch, right? Like, she doesn't get it. This is hard. But with her help and the help of my middle-class friend, Michelle, I did go talk to all my professors that semester, and I did clean up all those incompletes, and was the first person in my family, immediate or extended, to ever walk the stage with a 4-year degree. Not very long after that, that Poverty Project coach, she took another position. And so I prayed and I applied, and they hired me because nobody else applied, right? I think they were kind of terrified. But from 2012 to 2017, I got to be a part of building the largest, most successful poverty project like that in the country, getting more people completely out of financial poverty than any other project had ever done, including myself and my 3 little boys and my mom for the first time since she was 5. Not very long into that, these projects are not faith-based, but they're often housed in churches, as was ours. And I don't know, a few months into it, the lead pastor of the church, she calls me and she says, hey, Rebecca, we'd like to hire you to be our outreach coordinator. So all of a sudden, I was the lady with the diaper ministry and the benevolent fund and the food pantry. So the first day that I go to Walmart to buy these diapers, right? Like, I am keenly aware that my turning point started with this lady in these diapers. And so I go to Walmart to buy these diapers, and I am just emotionally leveled. When I walk in that store, it's like nobody else was in there. It was just me and my story. And I get this shopping cart and I pack it so full of diapers, right? That I've got them stacked on top and I've got them, shoved underneath, and I'm tears just streaming down my face. And I get up and the diapers are falling off and I'm putting them back on. And I get up to the checkout line and the checkout girl, she looks at me and she goes, "Honey, how many kids do you have?" Right? Many miracles started to take place in my life at this time through this process and through these relationships with these middle class people. I got selected for a Habitat house in 2014. And so we got to build our own home. Prior to this, I had moved 74 times in my life. I had tracked it down and counted them out. And that does not count the times that I was homeless, living in a car, surfing somebody's couches. My oldest, a little redhead there, he had already moved 17 times at this age. So we got to build a Habitat house that year. While I was building this Habitat house, I was working 3 jobs. I was the outreach coordinator at the church. I was the coach at the Poverty Project. And I was bartending 12-hour shifts on Friday and Saturday nights. And in the summer, I taught art to little kids. So this was probably the hardest year of my life, because you get up on Saturday morning every Saturday for several months and go build your house, right? But here's where we ended up. I came from nothing, and I know what it's like to just want a place of your own. That roller coaster of instability, it does something to a person. It does something to your kid, to my kids, to our kids. That constant stress, right? So while that was the hardest year of my life, it was also the most amazing year of my life. And people often say, "Oh, Rebecca, you wanted out of poverty. You had grit, you had determination." And it's like, no, I had all those things before I got out of poverty. If people in poverty didn't have those things, they would be dead. What I had that got me out of poverty was people, middle class people that took an interest in my life, took an interest in my kids' lives. And they also empowered me and brought me to the table as a problem solver, not somebody to be fixed. They had this idea that the people closest to the issues are the ones that have the answers to what they need, not people coming in from the outside, not people who have studied, read books, gotten doctorates. It's the people experiencing the issues. They have the insight that we need to find the answers. And I can promise you that I did not look like this then. I did not talk. I mean, maybe I kind of talked like this then, but I had a lot of trauma and a lot of stress and a lot of fear. And my self-confidence was so low, right? At this same time, teachers are watching my kids transform right before their eyes, right? Like, so I'm transforming and my kids are transforming. And teachers were just really interested in me. And they kind of realized that I was bilingual, right? Like I could translate poverty and middle class and back and forth. And so teachers started to pull me in and just were like, "Tell us what is going on here, because we are frustrated with these families. We are frustrated with these parents. We want to help in the worst way. And sometimes it feels like we're helping in the worst way." Because of that, people pulling me in to talk about my insight into families and what they really needed, I kind of accidentally bumped up against this service center, an educational service center. And they approached me and they were like, "Hey, what would you do if you started going into schools and training on poverty and poverty resolution?" And so in 2015, I started consulting on the side for them. 2017, January of 2017, ESDAC is the service center. They approached me and said, Rebecca, what would you do if we made you the director over 10 of our learning centers in the state of Kansas? And learning centers were programs for high school dropouts like me to go back and get their diploma. And I said, I don't know. I need to pray about that. And I called him back the next week and I'm like, are you guys going to let me build poverty projects out of those learning centers? And they said, yeah, that's kind of what we hoped you would say. And so February 1 of 2017, I left the poverty project in my town and went to work full time for this organization. And since then, we've gotten 11 poverty projects off the ground in multiple communities in Kansas, one now in Illinois. And I'm not gonna show you all the data, but we're getting people out of poverty. We're working with 250 parents and a bunch of kids, and we're bringing them to 200% of the federal poverty guideline. You know, most of the families that I work with, they come in making $8, $9, $10, $11, $12, $15,000 a year. And we're moving them up to 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, $90,000 a year. Now, this does not happen overnight, and it's not easy, but we turn the light on in people's lives. That's all I needed. I needed somebody to say, we're going this way. You're not going alone. We're going with you. And we know you can do that. Direction, community, contribution, purpose. Let's see if this video plays right. Colleen, text me if it's crummy, okay? I think we should be good.
First, I'd like to thank Rebecca for volunteering me that I was speaking tonight at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So I apologize for any hiccups. My name is Sherry, and I guess my new and good is being here this evening and having the opportunity to speak with all of you. Let's see where I came from. I came from a single parent household. Very angry, bitter woman raised me. And I was emancipated at the age of 16 with no car, no license, no ID, nowhere to live, no job, no prospects. The only people I knew were the people that I had met in juvie because I had run away from the very angry, bitter woman I mentioned earlier. That led me to a life of hanging out and eventually marrying the wrong kind of people. And I had 2 beautiful children. And I said, I can't live like this anymore. And I tried to be a mom from a background without knowing how. When I started Circles, 2 children, no job, no car, no license, almost no house. I was getting there real quick. And Circles really helped me turn all that around. Found a job, got a car. They helped me get my license back. And at that point, I really felt like, hey, I've done it. I'm there. Look at me. And then I started getting frustrated because I'm still broke. You know, I work and I'm still in poverty. I have a car and I still don't know how to keep it running all the time. And the thing that has helped me the most in Circles is even through that frustration, I had people that encourage me, keep going, it's gonna be okay. It gets very hard when the objective is to get yourself out of poverty and you're like, okay, where do I go now? And Circles has really gone above and beyond to network and find out, okay, where do we go now? I had a meeting today at Central Christian College. I will be starting either in October or December, depending on which day it is. And I will be able to get my bachelor's within a few years. And I have a direction. When you live in poverty and life is hard every day. You feel like you want to withdraw from everybody sometimes, or I do, because I don't want to be that person that just needs you to help me. I don't want the handout. I want to know how to get out. And Circles has always looked for a way for that to happen. And that's why I'm here. My allies are Amy and Carrie Ann, and Amy helps me with the organization because it's not my strong skill, and and she lends an eye ear, and so do you. So I guess tonight I get to come in and talk about having hope again. And sometimes that stagnates, and we need people around us that can tell us, hey, you're gonna get through this too. Because otherwise, once you start losing hope, it all seems to go downhill. So that's what Circles has done for me.
Sherry, she was one of my toughest leaders. When families come in, we call them leaders. And oh, don't do that.
First, I'd like to thank.
There we go. And so Sherry has 10 ACEs, 10 adverse childhood experiences. I imagine most of you know what those are, but if you don't, you know, ACEs are, the more you have of them, the harder your life is. And the harder your life is, the more you have of them. And so there's 10 factors possible on an ACEs, adverse childhood experiences scoring grid. Sherry has 10. And you look at resilience factors, there's 14 possible. You want a high score with resilience. Sherry had 2. Angry and smart. Sherry now is working full-time at the Poverty Project that I left. She's a homeowner. Her kids are doing amazing. Her son's about to have his senior year and is off to college to be an anesthesiologist. There are a bunch of Rebecca's and Sherry's running around every town. Sherry is exceptional, but she's not the exception. So let's use the chat just a little bit here. Oops, no, that's not what I want. Here's what I want. Oh, I want to do this first. Hang on. What's the #1 cause of poverty in the United States? What is the #1 cause of poverty in the US? And let's just throw it in the chat. Well, and I lost my chat. Allison, thanks. Monique, thanks. Nancy, thanks. Cindy, thanks. Yeah, Megan, thanks. Penny, yes. Elena, thanks. Lynette, thanks. These are all brilliant answers. And as you guys know, poverty is very complex. And everything that you're putting in the chat is a part of the framework of solutions that we need to kind of put together and make sense out of and organize. But the answer that I'm looking for, the #1 cause of poverty in the United States is it's birth. That's what started my poverty. That's what started my kids' poverty. Now, nobody gets to leave here today and say that Rebecca Lewis Pancrest does not think poor people should have children, because that is not what I am saying. And that's actually shown up in a newspaper before. Here's our data. And it's going to look even more intense after this next census. 880,000 kids are born every year into poverty. Next year, another 880,000. Year after that, another 880,000. 320,000 of those kiddos are born into what I call abject poverty, right? Family in the United States, families making less than $1,000 a month, which you will always be caught by the tail in that story. And I always want to stop here for a minute and just kind of point out, because these 880,000 kids, they're born into families that do important jobs in our communities. Our communities would not run without these families. There are CNAs, there are paras, they run our restaurants. They make sure we can get gas on the way to the airport early in the morning, right? There are retail folks. We need these families. And so 880,000 kids, another 880,000 next year. We are woefully behind other countries on this. %25 never escape in their lifetime. And I am here to tell you, it may seem hard to believe today, but me and my kids, we were part of that 25%. What I didn't tell you was when I called that poverty project coach and said I had 17 incompletes at college and I needed to take a step back, I had already maxed out my school loans. So I was having to work a bunch of hours to pay to be at this private university. And, you know, I've maxed out school loans. If I'd have taken a step back at that point with 17 incompletes, do you guys think I would have made it back in? I promise without that poverty project and those women holding my feet to the fire, right? Like I'd have stepped back because of the chaos, the toxic stress. I would have stepped back, and to this day, I would be working my tail off somewhere, dreaming about a better life for my kids. I would imagine my kids would be caught up in the system. You know, when you're down in the trailer park, there's really two stories happening. The girls get pregnant, the boys go to prison, right? Like those are the stories. We all know that. It's a fear that drives us. This is probably a big place that I can bring some hope today. I went to college to be a teacher. And in that training, that formal training, they taught us what's called birth to 5 brain science. And that brain science taught us that the architecture of your brain was built from 0 to 5. And then after 5, it was fixed. That's the word they used. And so, you know, when I'm exploring this science, I'm thinking 0 to 5 for me was horrible, right? Like, what does this even mean? It feels very defeating. And then if you're in America, you have this other narrative running, right, about brain cells. And we have brain cells and you only get so many. And if you do a bunch of drugs and drink a bunch of alcohol, right? So between these two stories, things were not looking good for me. But I was this poverty project coach, and I just remember feeling like something functionally was changing in my brain. Like up here, I could feel something happening. And I noticed I was able to start seeing forward. I was becoming less reactive. I was becoming more trusting of people I didn't know. And then I had these families that I was working with from generational poverty, and I was kind of watching that play out with them too. And I knew it was contradictory to the science, but I knew something was happening up here, and that these relationships with these middle-class people had something to do with it, right? I was keynoting on stages talking about this, telling people, I know I'm not a researcher. I know I don't have anything to back this up, but I'm telling you, relationships change brains. So I became fascinated with the brain on poverty. So I started researching and reading books and looking at videos and getting academic white papers on the subject, right? Which, truth be told, I've never really been smart enough to read an academic white paper, but I could tell people were studying this. And I was looking at brain scans of the brain on poverty. Because of that fascination, I accidentally stepped into the science of trauma and the brain on trauma, right? And started looking at those brain scans. So I'm looking at the brain scan of brains on trauma, brain scans of the brain on poverty. And what did I see? The same picture, right? Because the brain doesn't know if it's trauma, war, abuse, neglect, right? The brain just wires itself for protection. If you hang out in the science of trauma and adversity long enough, you will accidentally step into the science of resilience. And what did that science tell me? The brain science of resilience. It told me that our birth to five brain science was incomplete. And it told me that the brain has plasticity throughout its lifetime, that the brain wants to heal and can heal at any age. And the science of resilience told me that the number one most important thing for the brain to heal at any age is access to safe, supportive, available relationships, right? So I found my story in this science. And I had been training schools on poverty, but I didn't want to go into schools and just raise compassion for families that experience poverty, because that is super important. But I want to get kids out. I want to get people out. And so I had this lightning bolt moment. Holy smokes. To both solve poverty and heal trauma, you use the same resilience building framework, because it's all about relationships. So in the chat, just kind of throw up there what's coming, throw in the chat, what's coming up for you right now? Just kind of do a little brain dump. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to just jump in there and what's coming up for you right now? Jessica, thanks. Cindy, thanks. Allison. Yeah, Catherine, thanks. It is a big mission, right? It's daunting. Yeah, Ellen, one stable, caring, loving adult relationship changes brains. I work a lot with teachers. I build poverty projects, but I also, probably most of my time is spent going in and building trauma-informed schools. And sometimes our families can be really transient. They move around a lot. And it can leave teachers feeling very frustrated that, I put all this time and energy into this kid and then they were just gone. And that is heartbreaking in and of itself. But the thing I would tell you is if you can get a kid out of their survival brain through their relational brain into their thinking brain, you actually build these little brain trees that nobody can ever take away from them. And so every ounce that we invest in a kiddo's life, in a mom's life, in a dad's life, it writes an architecture that stays with them forever. So none of it's wasted. So what is the currency in poverty? Like, what's the currency? What do families in poverty need to feel honored and to come with us? What has to be there? And if it's not there, they get offended. Do you guys know? Cindy, thanks. So the number one currency in poverty, it is, oops, go back. Let's go here. I'm gonna have to do it like this. Let me see if I can make this bigger. There we go. The number one currency in poverty is relationships, right? It's relationships. In order to get a family or a person or a kid to come with us, we have to work through the operation of relationships. It's critical. If you don't give them the relationship currency, then they're going to have a hard time honoring the middle class currency. Do you guys know what the middle class currency is? It's achievement. This is Ruby Payne stuff. Ruby Payne figured this out a long time ago, and it really does match up with trauma-informed science. So a lot of times you'll hear in a school, especially as our kids get a little older, middle school, high school, right? You'll hear, I'm not going to give that kid a relationship until they give me respect. And it's kind of backwards. In order for kids from tough places to give you respect, they first need a relationship. You have to understand the entire system of poverty is wired on relationships. I run poverty simulations in communities and schools, and I stick middle-class people in poverty for an hour, and they all start stealing and moving drugs for money within the first 10 minutes, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is they don't know how to work together, right? And so when they get done and they're all freaked out and stressed out, and I'm like, if I'd have made you guys go into month 2, month 4, month 6, what would you have had to start figuring out? And what they would need to start figuring out is that their greatest resources don't lie on the outside of the community. Their greatest resources lie with each other. So poverty is very communal. And relationships are your driving force. That's why you get out of bed in the morning, but it's also how you survive. And in middle class, families are very achievement oriented. And it's not that families in middle class are not relationship driven. They're not, that's not what I'm saying. But when you think about the pandemic, when I work, and I don't know what it looks like for you guys out there, but we had local control in our school system, so each community could do what they want. And when I talked to administrators, because I spent a lot of time with superintendents, they said, Rebecca, it's mostly the poor families that are choosing to do the remote and stay home. And the middle class families are all kind of chewing us out about our sports program and not having sports. And I said, yeah, because the poor families, and for families in poverty, they cannot imagine losing grandma. Like the idea of bringing something home and having grandma get sick, they can't wrap their brain around that, because that's a loss of an important, valuable relationship. And families in middle class are really afraid of losing achievement for their kids. Again, we don't even speak the same language. And understanding this about each other is going to be really helpful in how we show up, right? Just that small little interaction. Light up when you see somebody that you work with. Ask them about their lives for just a moment and see if that doesn't transform the way that they are experiencing you and you are experiencing them, because we want families in poverty to achieve. Most of our programs are designed on some type of metric, right? Outcomes. And we don't meet those. And families know that, they know that. But to not give them a little bit of relationship up front is really dishonoring them. So I always kind of help schools with hey, if you want kids in poverty to achieve, don't focus on achievement, focus on relationships. And this is actually backed by science now, right? If kids are spending a lot of time in their survival brain, we've got to bring them out through the relationship brain and get them to their thinking brain where they can learn and build little brain trees. A lot of middle-class kids are already showing up in this part of their brain ready to go. Not all, because remember, trauma is not indicative of a class system or a race or a geography. It is common everywhere. Kind of a little saying, all behavior is a form of communication. And so prior to trauma-informed anchor concepts like this one, that all behavior is a form of communication, do you guys know what paradigm we've been living under for the last 60, 70 years around behavior? Prior to all behavior is a form of communication, all behavior was a form of what? You probably won't get this right away, but when I say it, you'll be like, oh yeah, prior to this thought here, all behavior was a form of choice. And that is behaviorism. And it's what our systems are built upon it. Our schools are built upon it. Middle class is built upon it. And it's not that it's not true, because typically cause and effect brains spend a lot of time up here making decisions and weighing options and thinking about future ramifications, right? But there's these other parts of our brain where we're not choosing. And so the idea is that we start to say, what's the cause of that? What's really going on? And understand that there are multiple times for all of us where we don't choose behavior. You guys ever done something? You're like, why did I do that? Why did I say that? What's going on with me? We're not actively choosing. And our behaviorism paradigm, I always ask people, who's the father of behaviorism? It's Skinner, right? And how did Skinner get his research? It was on animals. So let's dig in here for a minute. And then I want to here.
The reality is that we all need a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of anxiety to perform well. If we don't care about that exam that we're going to have tomorrow, we'll probably fail. If we're going to cross the street and a truck is coming at us, we have release of adrenaline. We have release of a hormone that we call cortisol. We want to jump out of there, and adrenaline and cortisol are going to help us do that. So there's that good amount of stress. But if all day long you're feeling like a truck is coming at you, day after day after day, that's going to take a toll on the body. And the amygdala obviously here has greater activation.
Yes.
In the PTSD. We were able to image children that had experienced trauma and compare those brain images with children that didn't have an experience of trauma and didn't have symptoms.
Right, an exaggerated fear response.
An exaggerated fear response with decreased activation in areas that we need to control that emotion, in the frontal areas.
Exposure to early adversity and trauma literally affects the structure and function of children's developing brains. So the kid next to them hits them, or the teacher reprimands them in a way that they're uncomfortable with, right? Literally what they're feeling, that activation is like there was a truck coming at them. You can give something that will mask symptoms, right? For example, if someone has a cough, right? You can give them a really strong cough serum that will suppress their cough. But if it's because they have tuberculosis or lung cancer, then what you're doing is merely masking the symptoms while the disease process continues to fester. We know what's happening in children's brains and bodies with the experience of toxic stress. So the question now is, what do we do about it?
I don't know why it's not showing up, but that is, to give credit to that, that's the Resilience documentary by KPJR Films. It is the sibling documentary to Paper Tigers. So if you haven't seen it, it's powerful. It's 54 minutes long. It's the fastest way I know how to get trauma-informed science into somebody. I've shown it in all kinds of settings: school boards, retiree groups, Sunday school classes. So it's an amazing tool. But all behavior is a form of communication. Resilience, Nancy, it's called Resilience, the science of adversity, the biology of hope. So maybe one of Colleen or Allie can find that on the internet and throw that in the chat. Powerful, powerful conversation starter. Let's go back here. No, stop. That's not what I want. exit. There we go. Come back over here. So when we talk about trauma, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but I kind of want to help you guys understand, again, this is a brain issue and this happens to all of us, right? Like, there's 3 types of stress that we talk about, like normal stress, stress that I had last night thinking about today. And what if the 2 hours isn't meaningful? What if they all know everything I talk about already? Like, that kind of stress before a test. Or then there's tolerable stress, which is when something bad happens, right? Like somebody dies, we lose a job, our finances go upside down. That is hard stuff, but it's tolerable stress. And if you notice, it says because it's buffered by supportive relationships. Toxic stress is when there's bad stuff going on and you're isolated. That's what flips tolerable stress to toxic stress. The way I help people understand the anatomy of trauma and of toxic stress is just to break it down like this. If you feel powerless and overwhelmed, it's going to trigger your fight or flight response system. It just is. And that's normal. That's what's supposed to happen, right? Like we need that response system. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It means that thing's working. If I leave my house today and I am in a wreck and a pileup and I can't get out of my car, am I going to feel pretty powerless and pretty overwhelmed? Yeah, my fight or flight response system is going to come on and it's going to help me deal with that. If I am in a domestic violence relationship and every night when I come home, I never know what I'm walking into, am I going to feel powerless, overwhelmed, and isolated because I can't tell anybody? Yeah, that's toxic stress. So the easiest place to work from when you think about, well, how do we mitigate toxic stress with kids? How do we mitigate toxic stress with family? It's relationships and community, right? Somebody put in the chat that I'm seen. Hallelujah, right? See me. So I've been training trauma informed since, 2015. And it typically takes 2 to 3 years for a person to become deeply trauma informed. And I think there's a misconception that like, oh yeah, I heard about the ACE study, I'm trauma informed. Trauma informed is kind of the last stop for an organization, for a school. There's trauma aware, trauma sensitive, trauma responsive, and you finally get to trauma informed. And the day that you'll know that you're truly trauma informed is the day that you see behavior as a brain issue and not a character issue. So the story I like to tell here is I got up super early one morning to go train a school. I'm talking like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm in my car and I need gas. And I go to the gas station in our town that I always go to. And I pull up to the pump and it's pouring rain and a guy pulls up behind me. He wants the pump, right? And I'm like, crap, I don't know how much money's in my bank account. So I'm just going to pay with cash, right? So I pump the gas. Again, it's pouring rain and I've got my makeup on, right? So I pump the gas. I get right back in my car and I pull right around to the front of the little convenience store. I get out and I go in and I'm getting my coffee, right? I get up to the checkout line and the checkout lady just starts yelling at me. Don't you ever do that again. Don't you ever do that again. She takes my money, puts it in the register, turns back around, starts yelling at me again. She's like, the lights were flashing. I didn't know where you were. That's my $36 if you run off. And in just, a second, I was like, oh, I activated her fight or flight response system. She's dysregulated. I scared her. I saw behavior as a brain issue and not a character issue. Prior to this day, I probably wouldn't have said anything to that lady, but I'd have got in my car and for the next 30 miles, I'd have drove down the road with that hamster wheel just running. Like, how dare she talk to me like that, right? Like, it was obvious I was right there. Like, I'm going to call her boss. You are truly trauma informed when you start to see behavior as a brain issue. and not a character issue. My mom. So have any of you guys ever tried to diagnose a family member, like self-diagnose, right? I've been trying to diagnose my mom for years. And then I watched the documentary Paper Tigers with her, and I watched my mom counting those aces. And she had 9, right? And my wheels like started turning. I was like, holy smokes. It's always been an overactivated stress response system for my mom. So one day I come home from work and she's watching my kids, and I come in the house and I get to the back door of the backyard, and I let the dogs in, and we got a puppy, and the puppy comes barreling in the house, right? Jumps on the bigger dog, makes the bigger dog yelp. My mom starts yelling. She's like, you need to do something about that puppy. That puppy's always hurting our bigger dog. And I'm like, Mom, it's just a puppy. It'll grow out of it. That's what they do. And then she starts talking about this neighbor kid and how I never intervene with Elijah, or my youngest. And next thing I know, I hear her gather up her stuff and she walks out the front door. The front door slams. She leaves in a huff, right? And I was at my kitchen sink when this happened. And all in one moment, it just kind of hit me. Oh, when that puppy came inside and jumped on that bigger dog and made it yelp, it activated my mom's fight or flight response system. She's dysregulated. And so for the first time in my entire life, I walked over to my cell phone and I texted my mom and I said, hey, Mom, I love you. It's going to be okay. Now, who do you guys think the hardest person it is to see that's having a brain issue? It's ourselves, right? Because, right, when I'm having a brain issue, it is not a brain issue. So-and-so did this happened, right? So this takes a lot of time and attention. And for teachers in schools, I think there's such this tremendous weight. And when kids start flipping out, teachers take it really personal. It's not about you guys, right? A bunch of kids coming to school having brain issues. You're doing a good job. So this is my little guy, Elijah. He's my youngest. Right around 2 years old, Elijah stopped talking and he stopped looking at me. And the meltdown started. And he had 2 or 3 massive meltdowns a day, and they were really violent towards me. So like pull my hair, claw my eyes, bite me, kick me, hit me. And Elijah hated clothing. He did not like to have clothes on, and he hated the car seat. Like I remember I took him to the police department and I was like, okay, officer, teach me how to keep this kid in a car seat. And the officer's like, absolutely, ma'am. And he goes and sticks Elijah in there, right? And like 20 seconds later, Houdini's out. Head Start comes into our life. And it turns out to have your kid in Head Start, they have to show up with clothing on and be in a car seat, right? So every morning, the dance would ensue. And, you know, just massive meltdowns, me getting clothes on him, getting him in the car seat. I'd get in the front seat and I'd hold my hand back here and kind of hold him in that car seat, right? And drive across town. And every morning we would get across town, he'd be out of the car seat, naked and ticked, right? So I'd put the shirt on him, put the pants on him, kind of clutch the shirt and the pants together, stick him up under my arm, right? Kicking and screaming, biting, clawing. I bring him up and I drop him off to you guys. As I got better and Head Start started to do some amazing things with my kiddo, and we got an autism diagnosis, the meltdowns went from 2 or 3 massive meltdowns a day to 2 or 3 a week, and they stopped being violent towards me. But, you know, here we are, 3rd grade. That's just our story, right? That's just our story. I never knew when they were going to come, never knew what was going to set them off, never knew how long they would last. And I was training trauma informed in schools, and I'm like, I wonder what would happen if I started teaching Elijah some of this stuff. So I started to teach Elijah about his brain. I started to teach him about his amygdala. I started to teach him about being dysregulated, working from the bottom up instead of the top down. I taught him about cortisol. And I said, you know, too much cortisol, Elijah, will make you sick. We don't want that. It's not good for your body. And he's a third grader, right? And so I have no idea if any of this is clicking. There was nothing out there at the time. So I just built this target and had it hanging up in the house. I was trying to get him to tell me where he was on the target. And I just kind of kept cultivating that conversation. And one day he's down in the basement and I hear the mouse slam down on the computer desk. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go, right? And Elijah comes stomping up to the top of the stairs and he gets to the top of the stairs and he says, I'm dysregulated. My amygdala is pumping. There's cortisol flooding. Like, Elijah, what do you need from me? And he said, I don't need anything from you. And I taught him that it takes a kid 5 to 9 minutes to come out of the first stage of dysregulation, right? Elijah's a super time-bound kid. Even today, he'll be like, okay, mom, I'll see you in 7 hours and 42 minutes. But in that moment, Elijah went over and sat on the couch and started breathing and watching the clock. We went from 2 or 3 massive meltdowns a day to 2 or 3 a month to an entire summer without any. The night before 4th grade starts, Elijah comes to my room and he's like, I'm dysregulated. I'm like, what do you need, buddy? I got it, he says. And he goes upstairs, gets a bottle of water, comes down, sits on my bed, drinks that water, does breathing, and brings himself out. Why water? Because water flushes cortisol. Water flushes cortisol. Now, I would highly recommend if you're working with children that get dysregulated on a regular basis, you pre-teach this stuff, because if you try and hand a dysregulated kid some water and ask them to drink it when they're dysregulated, you might end up wearing that. When this little sweet boy, when it finally started clicking about his brain, do you guys know what he said to me? Mommy, you mean something's going on in my brain? I'm not bad. Christmas, my best friend who does ministry and her husband came and they got a little boy. He's probably 5 or 6, right? And he's at our house just having a fit. I mean, like kicking and screaming, and he's laying on my floor, like windmilling around, right? Spinning. And Elijah comes up and he says, Mommy, he's dysregulated. He needs some water. I'm like, Elijah, I don't think that's helping right now. But what's so powerful about that is my kid saw another kid as having a brain issue and not a character issue. Because we have these kids that are in our organizations, they're in our schools having brain issues, and the other kids don't have a way to interpret that, right? So you have this other thing happening. The kid's stress response system's overactivated. They're acting like this and they're losing friends and community. Elijah is meltdown free today. He's 11. He's a 6th grader now. But Elijah doesn't have meltdowns anymore. Elijah understands brain science. So teaching kids about the brain, teaching people about the brain, adults included, is probably one of the most important things that we can do, helping people understand what's going on. And so I don't know, I noticed that some of you work with kids. When I was looking at your welcome, hello. And so teaching kids about the brain, I would like to ask, how long have we been talking about self-regulation in the work that we do? How long have we been talking about self-regulation? Probably like decades, right? And a lot of the stuff that's in schools to help kids with self-regulation, it's not that it's wrong. I just think that often the timing of when we're using it is off. So, when you're self-regulated, what part of your brain are you in? If you are regulated, what part of your brain are you in? In your thinking brain, right? Your thinking brain. Yeah. And so when we're in our thinking brain, we can make decisions, we can see forward. But a lot of times what we're doing is kind of cognitive think sheets, reflections when kids are still trapped in their survival brain. And so self-regulation, what you're going to start hearing more and more and more of from the science is something called co-regulation. Co-regulation. And it really is the idea that kids regulate off the adults in their lives. Kids regulate off each other's. Our amygdalas actually talk to each other. But what I help people kind of understand the science of co-regulation is think about a house, right? And if you think about a house, like the top floor of your house is mission control. And the top floor, when it is online, it is telling everything else what to do, right? You're working from a top down process. And that means you're regulated, right? And that's what we want to do, is help kids and families access more of this. But there's also two other parts to the house. One is the cellar and one is the main floor. So you got the cellar, which is your survival brain, the main floor, which is your pack brain, your mammalian brain, your relational brain, you're also your emotional reactionary brain, and your thinking brain. And I always ask, kids and adults when I'm working with them, can you ever be in the cellar of your house and jump to the very top floor? No, right? What do you have to do to get to the top floor if you're in the cellar? You got to go through your relational brain to get to your thinking brain. Co-regulation. Kids regulate off the adults in their lives. So I do a lot of work with schools to help support teachers. And I do a lot of work with families to help support parents and grandparents, right? Because the number one investment we can make in kids is to build the capacity of the adults that are important in their lives. The number one investment we can make for kids is to build the capacity of the adults that are important in their lives. That includes families and teachers. I threw a link in here. I've looked for simple, easy brain science, brain curriculum. Oops, but I'm not going to show you guys this, but if you're interested, we have simple, beautiful curriculum on how to teach kids about the brain. So you guys will all get access to this slide deck and you can go look at that later if you want to. Okay, so the cornerstone of our emotional safety is our relationships. It is our relationships. Resilience is not a label. It is not a label. It is a verb. Resilience is something we actively build, and a huge portion of resilience is built externally. The way you build resilience is, I see you, I hear you, I'm with you. That is how you build resilience. I don't want that one there. I want it to go. Oh yeah, let's do this. Okay. Colleen, can you guys see this? We're gonna do an activity together. Let me make sure. So I want you guys to think about a horse. And this horse is kind of getting into trouble. It needs to have some work done with it. It's caused a safety issue on multiple occasions, and we need to kind of build this horse's capacity and build the skills of this horse. So if I'm going to work with a horse, where do I typically do that at? Like, where do I work with the horse? You guys can't see that, can you? Colleen, can you see that now? Got her messaging me, hang on. Okay, but Colleen, you can't see it when it's like this. I wonder if I can do this. Hang on, let me try this. Just a second. Share screen. Let's do desktop. Okay, Colleen, can you see this now? Yay, we can see it. Okay. So this activity is called working inside the fence, and you guys can take this activity with you and do it on your own. This is recorded so you'll know how. We got this horse and it's causing trouble and we need to work with it. Where do we typically work with the horse? Do I work with the horse out in the pasture? Hey, Cindy, thanks. Typically when we want to work with this horse, right, we bring the horse inside the fence, right, in the corral. So that's what this activity is called, is working inside the fence. So I want us to think about a kid that is getting in trouble. Maybe this kid's a safety issue in our buildings, in our organizations, in our community. And so just using chat, what are some of the systems, policies, consequences that start to show up in this kid's life that's getting in trouble, that's kind of start to box him in or her? So an example of that would be detention, right? So what else? Just throw it in the chat. What are some of the things that start showing up in this kid's life? Consequences, suspension, thanks. Meds, thanks. What else? RTFs, thanks. CYS. You guys got all kinds of acronyms. I don't know what they mean. That's okay. You know what they mean. Truancies, parent meetings. Yes, we're going to call home, right? It's become scapegoat. Thanks. Criminal charges. Yes. Yes. Labels. You guys are doing amazing. Labels. Can I spell labels? Yes. Okay. Transition, classroom, grade retention, wrong crowd. What else? So kid gets criminal charges. What starts to show up in his or her life? Probation officer, yes. A PO, thanks. Yeah, trouble at home. Fines, thanks. Yes, less access. Do you guys, do kids get expelled in where you are? I'm just gonna throw that on here because expulsion. I just saw that, Penny. I just was thinking that expulsion, right? Maybe even juvenile detention, right? I don't know what you guys call them. In school suspensions. Yes, I got suspensions up there. Nancy, thanks. Those are definitely some of the consequences start to come out of this. So yeah, and then we have dropouts, right? Okay. Yes, Cindy, definitely those shadow messages start coming in, right? But here's where I want us to stop for a minute. If I have a horse and it needs work, it's got all this stuff, right? And I take it and I put it inside the corral and I leave it there. Is that horse going to transform? Samantha, thanks. No, right? It's not the corral that transforms the horse. It's what happens inside the fence that's transformative. And so I just kind of want us to stop for a minute. And I know a lot of us don't even have control over a ton of these parameters that start showing up in a kid's life. But how much time, money, data, tracking, training, investment do we put on the fence Now we want the kid to transform and be safe so the kid doesn't need the fence anymore and the community is safe, right? But it really is about what happens inside the fence. That's transformative, that changes who we are. So what are some of those things that need to happen inside the fence for this kid to transform? What are some of the things? Yes, adults that take the time. Relationships, yes. Stable, consistent. You guys are gonna see all my bad spelling. Relationships. Positive. Sense of feeling safe, secure. You guys are doing good. Support. Soft approach. Consistency, yes, yes. Belonging. You guys are doing amazing. Yes. Right? This is the stuff that transforms lives. Now, the other thing I would add in here is probably also discipline, consequences, right? But wrapped in the context of safe, supportive relationships. This is where the resilience is built, right? And remember, especially if we're talking poverty, the culture of poverty, we're going to need some relationships. You got fight, flight, freeze going on. You're going to need some relationships with trust to get a person to start coming out of that, get a kid up here where we can start doing some real work. You guys did amazing. Boundaries, yes, right? Teaching kids where the boundaries are. We don't ever want to think because a kid comes from really tough circumstances that we let them run all over us, because that is not healthy for kids either. And it's not safe for the community, right? Kids need boundaries to push against. They do. But we get kids regulated first, we get adults regulated first, and then we start to do the work once they're up here. So let's take a look at this. You guys did amazing. You can find this at echotraining.org. There's tons of beautiful infographics there. They do amazing work. They're from the East Coast or West Coast, but echotraining.org. But the orange side is kind of what I call behaviorism, non-trauma informed behaviorism culture. The blue side is trauma informed thought, frameworks. So I'll just let you look for a minute. Maybe see if there's one that jumps out at you and throw it in the chat. So I want you to take a look at the bottom, the very bottom, if you can see it, where it says expert. And then it correlates to an enlightened witness. Because I really want to help you guys understand what resilience is. Expert to enlightened witness. So I work a lot with schools, and man, even in rural America, we got more and more kids showing up at younger ages, right? That are just, there's a lot of violence happening. And teachers are like, I'm not trained for this. I don't know how to, I don't. And so what will start to happen if a teacher feels isolated enough, you'll start to hear this narrative of, look, either you get some experts in here for Johnny, because again, I don't know how to help this kid. I'm out of my element. Get some experts in here for Johnny. And then if it goes on long enough without the support, you'll start to hear the story of either you get some experts in here for Johnny, or we get Johnny out of here, or I'm out. And again, this is not a character issue. This is an overwhelm issue for our staff and the challenges that they're facing that they feel ill-equipped to deal with. But I just kind of want us to stop here for a moment and look at the enlightened witness, right? What the heck is that? An enlightened witness is just somebody that showed up in our life, and they helped us get through something. They could have been in our life for a long time, or maybe just a short while. And they give us a golden message. Most of us never think about this, but they do. You know, somebody was throwing in the chat, I don't belong here. I need, like, those are kind of our shadow messages, but our enlightened witnesses bring us a golden shadow message, a truth. And so we're going to kind of jump in here today, and I'm going to help you understand resilience by chasing down where your resilience was built. So third grade, I had Mrs. Bacon. Mrs. Bacon had these big eyes and this salt and pepper hair, and all the kids loved her. And she just had this way, right? And you just wanted to be seen by Mrs. Bacon. About this same time, I was noticing that kids in my neighborhood were allowed to go in houses, but I wasn't allowed to go in. So I was already starting to get this idea that something was off about me. And I was getting to school super early. And even 100 years ago when I was a kid, right, they wouldn't let you in the building until a certain time in the morning, and you couldn't get into your classroom until after that. And it was cold out. I was outside by myself. I saw the classroom light come on. And here comes Miss Bacon. And she stands over me and she says, you know, I've got all this stuff in my classroom that's not getting done in the morning. And she said, I'm thinking I need a helper. This person would have to be responsible. They'd have to show up every day, and they'd have to work independently if I give them a list. She looks at me and she says, do you think you're that person? Yes, Mrs. Bacon, I'm that person. So from that morning on, I got to start going in and being in Mrs. Bacon's classroom as soon as she got to the building and doing jobs. And her message to me was, I am wanted. Because remember, I'm already starting to figure out from other places that maybe I'm not wanted. Now, here's what I'm going to ask you. Did Mrs. Bacon really have jobs that needed to get done in the morning? Probably not, right? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to really kind of think about who is that person that kind of turned that light on for you. Don't overthink it. Just trust what comes up. An enlightened witness can be somebody from your childhood. It can be somebody that's in your life right now. It could be somebody from a couple years ago. Don't overthink it. Trust what comes up. And I want you to just kind of write that down. And I want you to put a sentence or two about what they did, because we're going to use this in an activity. And the I message they gave you. So I'm just going to give you just a couple minutes to really think about an enlightened witness and their role. Write it down. Coach, pastor, friend, husband, mom, dad, teacher. What they did and the I message that they gave you. You take about 3 minutes. Oh, Cassandra, that's amazing. Cassandra, can you see the screen? Like, does it say role of enlightened witness and it's all white? Is that what you're seeing? Sweet. Okay. So once you get kind of your enlightened witness identified and what they did and their message, then go to mentee.com and enter the code 4442185. And you can do this on your phone, or you can jump over on a different, but go to mentee.com. You're going to put in the role of your enlightened witness and the sentence of what they did, and then their iMessage to you. Hmm. Let's take a look at what they did. Friends, these are your strategies right here. This is the stuff that changes lives. This is the stuff that happens inside that fence. Right, I work with schools, and there is some deeper work with trauma informed to build it, sustain it. But like, it's not some special program, right? Like, it's this stuff, this simple stuff that people do that impacts us for the rest of our lives. It's not hard, and you don't need special training. This is where your resilience was built. This is how your resilience was built. Somebody somewhere helped you get through something. These are the messages that we want people to take away from our time with them. I am smart. I am capable. I am safe. I am needed. I'm loved. I matter. I'm enough. I'm helpful. Right? I'm wanted. And I want us to go back here and just look for just a minute. Does anybody see like psychiatrists, psychologists up here? The experts? Now, I am not saying that those folks are not incredibly important to our stories. But these are the people who had a great impact on our lives. And I would venture to say that they probably didn't fix anything for you. They probably just showed up and loved you, and you didn't have to earn it, right? They just showed up and they were with us. And they saw us. I see you, I hear you, I'm with you. And most of us have these messages in our minds. I'm not enough. I'm bad. I'm not worthy. I'm incompetent. And in the experiential trauma-informed work that I train, that's us all born out of cruelty. But those messages come out of cruelty when we're little. They get on us and they ride with us for the rest of our lives. But what I'm going to ask you is, were these enlightened witnesses, like, can you trust your enlightened witness? Are they trustworthy people? Did they have any reason to lie to you? No. Our enlightened witnesses are typically really trustworthy people. This is your truth. Write this down. Take this with you. I am worth it. I am worthy. What about that next hard thing you got to do, that thing that's got your knees knocking? What if this is true? What if you are worthy? What if you are enough? How might that change how you show up to that thing? How might that change how you show up right now, if this is true? Guys, ready to land the plane? Oh, we got 7 minutes. So I do some pretty deep experiential trauma-informed training. And by the way, teacher, that's not gonna work. Dang it. Stop share. Let's do this. Share again. Sorry, I'm sorry. Okay, share again. Teacher, always in the top 3. Teacher, because this is where our resilience was built. Okay. I learned this work from a batterer intervention participant program and the experiential work that I now do with schools. And so they've been collecting data for the last 15 years on men that get court ordered to their program because they batter. So the middle column is the adverse childhood experiences study done in the mid-90s. And it was conducted on 17,000, mostly white, all middle-class people. And they pulled out the men in that study. And here's the prevalence of adversity the men in that original study reported. 7.6 reported emotional abuse, 29.9 reported physical abuse. Here are BIP, batter intervention participants in Kansas. So men that got court ordered. And here's the level of adversity that they report. And we look at this and it kind of makes our stomach hurt, but it makes sense, right? But here's what you need to know. When the men go through this 30-some week curriculum and they get to the enlightened witness part, time and time again, the men say, if I'd have just had one enlightened witness growing up, if I'd have just had one, my life might have turned out different. It takes one safe, supportive adult to change a life course. Okay, we're gonna wrap up our time together. You can find me SDAC Resilience Team. That's our group Facebook page. This is the experiential trauma-informed work that I do. It's virtual, it's 2 days. It's pretty intense, but it teaches us about emotional activation and how to sit with emotional activation and how to ferret out our shadow stories and figure out if they're even true. Okay. Please view us, the families that you see in your community that you're working with, please view us through a lens of love, because most of the stuff that you're seeing are coping strategies that people develop in survival. I know you work with a lot of parents. I know sometimes your stomach hurts and you're frustrated. Here's what you need to know. In my 20s, most days, the only goal that I had for my life was to get as absolutely high as I could without killing myself. Right? That was my goal. Right around 30, I switched to alcohol. My whole family was ecstatic. They're like, look, she's not a meth head anymore. She's a drunk. It's legal. She's not going to go to prison. But I drank like I used. And I truly did not have a drinking problem. I had a stopping problem. Every time I'd stop drinking, I'd go straight to the hospital with DTs, delirium tremens. So 2010, I cycled in and out of hospitals. Last 4 years of my drinking, I drank a half gallon, 100 proof vodka every day. I was physically addicted to alcohol. in this terrible place where I was terrified that if I did drink, I was going to die, and terrified if I didn't drink, I was going to die. What you need to know is that in 2006, in a crappy trailer house in the middle of nowhere, October 2006, I started to get down on my hands and knees every single night and beg God. God, just make me a good mom. 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 And please don't let anybody take my kids before I get this figured out. I would just pray that over and over and over again. Regardless what shape I was in, I never missed a night. October 2006, I prayed that prayer every single night till January 4th of 2011, when that stuff got lifted off me all in one moment. Community brought me in and changed our lives. 74 times I moved, been homeless before, got that Habitat house. And now today, because of this community and everything that they've helped us do, we live on 4 acres in a 1910 farmhouse that's been remodeled with a creek and chickens. The life all people deserve to have, we get because of you guys and people like you. We have brain science to back up the relationship strategies now. Go find it. The research is out there. Relationships heal brains. You heal a brain thing with a love thing. Here's how you can find me. And this presentation is loaded onto their website. So, Colleen, I will let you jump in, my dear, and I'll show these last couple slides, but maybe you want to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, all I am going to say is just wow. Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate your story. I appreciate how you told it. I had texted a colleague and said it was like you let us into your living room window and we could see and experience in our virtual way of what you had faced. And I know that doesn't even come close to what you actually had faced in your challenges, but thank you for just putting it in a way that was so impactful. So we thank you very much. And I've seen a lot of very positive responses and a lot of thank yous in our chat box. Just if you flip back to the red t-shirt, I want to just mention a few things. On November 20th, we're asking everyone to wear red and also put it as a hashtag to raise awareness about youth homelessness. And then also the next slide, we have information about a virtual sleep out. So if you can hit enter for me. And that's November 20th. There's information about that. And one more page, one more hit on the slide there. Please know that if you go to the website, and it will be listed in the chat box as well, this website contains all the information about the entire week activities. It includes resources, it includes bio information and contact information for Rebecca. It also has her PowerPoint. And then the next day or so, we'll be uploading the video. So if you want to pass this on to other people who may not have been able to join us today, they can catch Rebecca's video on the website. So we encourage you to use it. We have a resource page that has tons of information of different agencies and organizations focusing on homelessness. So please check it out. And a big thank you to John Squire, who put that together for us as a lot of great information. I encourage you also to go on there and register for the rest of the week. We have dynamic speakers for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So we hope you will participate in this entire week-long activity. So the other thing too, just based on feedback, we've got some wonderful comments about Rebecca, but we also want to hear what we could do as an organization, a team, to improve. So we have an evaluation link as well. That's on the website. So if you go under Monday's activities, you'll see information about Rebecca, and then you'll also see a link for the evaluation. So if you don't mind, just take a few minutes to complete that. That'll be helpful for us. So, Dawn, do you have anything to add? Who is monitoring our chat?
No, just thank you. Anybody who knows me knows that I have like a box of tissues that I've gone through. It was a very powerful and authentic way to share what our families are going through. And so I just thank you, Rebecca, Becky, if I may be so bold, for being so authentic and vulnerable. You really touched my heart. And I think that your message is really going to help our community move forward, because the emotion is one thing that, you know, a McDonald's commercial will get me to the emotional part. It's the activation and empowerment that is going to make the difference. And that's the incredible story that you shared, and you gave us some very tangible tools. And so, and I have to obviously thank you, but I have to thank Colleen and the incredible group that is behind this. Colleen is our muscle. She understands the problem, and she understands the strengths and what strategies that we need to use as a community to move us forward. So Colleen, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, it was a great way to start our Monday. So we appreciate you being part of it. And I'm sure you're going to be hearing from several more people as your week goes on. So very impressive. And we thank you so much.
Thank you guys too. I look forward to what's next. And I'm always here if you guys need to have a conversation about possibilities. So
Exactly. And I guess the biggest thing too that we wanted to accomplish today is just kind of lay a baseline of knowledge for people. And that's exactly what you accomplished. You just kind of put us all in an even field at this point. And the next step are tools to make change. So thank you.
yeah, I'm going to jump out now. Okay. God bless everybody.
Thank you. And someone asked about certificates for the training. We can definitely get something out to the group, and we will email that. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.